Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
With 4th of July around the corner, the summer travel season is well underway. That usually brings a travel spike. But this year, projections are actually down in the U.S., with would-be domestic vacationers concerned about the state of the economy, and international tourists turning elsewhere in the midst of geopolitical tension and economic uncertainty. But not all travel projections are down.
The cruise industry is doing extremely well. Every single company is doing great. All the public companies that is all hitting kind of record revenue, record earnings.
That's Red Brown. He's not a big cruise guy himself, but he does cover the industry for Bloomberg.
You speak to anybody who cruises, they'll defend it to their death. They love it. They think it's the best way to travel.
That passion for cruising is part of the reason why companies like Carnival and Royal Caribbean are expecting strong demand this year. And to keep up with that demand, they've descended on Galveston, Texas, an island city of about 50,000 people that will host nearly 2 million cruisers this year.
It's a beach town first and foremost, so therefore it's a tourist town. So you'll have a lot of these shops selling T-shirts, hermit crabs, things like that. But at the same time, they're selling those things out of a 200-year-old building that might have a Civil War era cannonball lodged into it as well. You know, you still have cobblestone streets, and then you also have state-of-the-art cruise ships right next to it. So it's a fascinating place that happens to kind of find itself at the center of the cruise universe.
What makes Galveston such a good place for cruise tourism?
It's so attractive to the cruise companies because it does have such great access to the Western Caribbean. And also, if you think about the population centers that are around Galveston, it has 3 of the fastest growing cities in the country in San Antonio, Houston, and Dallas within a 5-hour drive. So that just has unlocked this incredible, they call it the drive-in market for the cruise industry.
But not everyone in Galveston is happy about its status as the fastest growing cruise port in the country. Because the cruise industry's love affair with this small Texas city has come with trade-offs. And the debate that's playing out there, and in port cities around the world, shows the big challenges that will come with the global cruise industry's ambitious expansion plans. This is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. I'm Sarah Holder. Today on the show, the seemingly unstoppable rise of cruise tourism and how it's transforming the port cities the industry relies on most. The cruise industry's recent turnaround has been pretty remarkable, especially when you think back just a few years to the start of the pandemic.
The story kind of did start on a cruise. I think that's when it got real for a lot of people.
I remember living in San Francisco and hearing about the cruise ship kind of parked in the San Francisco Bay and that being such an early warning sign.
Karen Dever from New Jersey got on the ship with her husband for a celebratory cruise. Now she wonders when she will ever get off.
You heard these horror stories of thousands of people being trapped in close quarters with this unknown virus kind of spreading through the ranks of people.
In the meantime, they've been airdropping supplies and coronavirus test kits to the cruise ship.
The cruise industry, it was hit really hard, right? And it kind of got slapped with a lot of skepticism and a lot of bad stereotypes about how, cruise ships are dirty and they're for older people and things like that.
It wasn't just stigma. In March 2020, the industry was hit with a no-sail order. The government mandated that cruise companies cease operations for over 6 months. But by late October, ships were allowed to get back out there. And passengers were just as eager.
It really did turn around almost immediately after they were able to start sailing again.
Almost 40 million people will take a cruise this year. That's according to an industry trade group called Cruise Lines International Association. And Red says it's not a coincidence that cruises are seeing record demand right now, amid economic uncertainty.
Cruises are cheap. They always kind of cite different numbers between 30 and 40% discount between a land-based alternative and a cruise vacation. So if you want to go to the Bahamas and maybe visit a Central American country as well in a week, there's really no cheaper way to do it than on a cruise. It's one ticket that you pay for. Most of the times it's pretty all-inclusive. So it's a very economical way for people, especially families, to travel.
But the post-pandemic boom in cruises has started to strain ports around the world. For cities that are popular cruise ship destinations,
places like Barcelona or Venice, the Greek islands, things like that, the limitations really come down to like the capacity for locals to continue to host and be happy with tourists. It's, we saw all the stories out of Barcelona, especially last year.
In Barcelona, locals protested over tourism last summer, chanting, "Tourists, go home," and even squirting some travelers with water guns. The city has put caps on cruise ships. So has Santorini. Amsterdam is trying to phase out cruise ships to curb tourism and pollution.
And again, cruises don't bring as many people to those cities as airlines do and hotels do, but cruises are a very visible part of that problem, right? You see these ships that are city blocks long and they're bright white. So I think that does kind of get an outsized attention, but really that is the stress when it comes to those ports of destination. You have 5,000 people that just kind of descend on a city and then they're gone by the end of the evening, and that can kind of irritate a lot of locals.
These destination ports have also seen increased demand because of regional conflicts that have reduced the options for seafaring travelers.
Very popular destinations in Israel and Russia are also closed at the moment because of the geopolitical issues in both areas.
All this has meant there are more passengers moving through a dwindling number of port cities. So cruise companies want to steer more of them away from the Eastern Caribbean and Europe towards destinations like Belize, Honduras, and Mexico. And that's what makes Galveston, Texas, an appealing departure port. It gives access to the waterways that connect the U.S. to those places. But departure ports like Galveston or like Port Canaveral in Florida are also facing their own challenges. People travel there to board a cruise ship bound for another exciting destination. But even though tourists aren't trying to stay there, these port cities have thousands of people flooding through them too, which can be a big strain on local resources.
Port Canaveral actually just failed in its latest attempt to add a new cruise terminal. They wanted to go from 7 to 8, which doesn't sound like much, but seven cruise terminals is a lot of business. And local politicians are starting to think is maybe we should start to shift our attention, our capital elsewhere.
And those limits on expansion in Port Canaveral are putting new pressures on Galveston, a historically smaller departure port about 1,000 miles away. That's after the break. If you compare Galveston's cruise traffic to that of other major hubs, it may seem like a drop in the ocean. But Bloomberg's cruise reporter, Red Brown, told me you have to put it in perspective.
Between the three biggest Florida cruise towns, Miami, Port Canaveral, and the Everglades, they do over 3,000 cruises a year from those three cities, right? Galveston will do around 400 this year, but it's incredible when you think it's a town of 50,000 people, right? I drove it in a day. I walked most of it in 3 days, and it's more or less doubled the amount of cruises they're doing.
That's since 2018, when the Galveston port got a new CEO named Roger Rees. Rees moved to Galveston after a 5-year stint at Port Canaveral.
He's a self-proclaimed cruise guy.
He worked with the cruise companies throughout the pandemic, even letting their crew workers disembark on the island. And
as soon as they lifted the no-sail order, Carnival said they're ready to go. They brought their ship in here.
And Carnival's first post-COVID trip left from Galveston. Red met with Rees during his trip to Galveston. And Rees told him since the pandemic, cruise tourism in the city has only grown. Passengers came and went through Galveston's port almost 3.5 million times in 2024, up from 2.2 million in 2019. There are 3 terminals at the port right now, with a 4th set to open in November.
We have 50 million people that live within 12 hours here. Yep. And so I think after COVID, people said, hey, I'm not going to get on a plane, I'll just drive. We can get to Galveston, drive there in a day, and get on a cruise ship.
Rees says cruise ships were responsible for about 65% of the port's revenue last year. The rest comes from cargo shipping and related activities. The port charges the ships for passenger parking, plus it collects a tariff on each passenger and rent from the companies leasing land for the terminals. According to a study commissioned by the port, cruise-related activities bring in almost $900 million each year to the local economy. Divide that by the number of ships.
The other day, every ship brings in $2.1 million worth of revenues to the state and the local governments, sales tax, payroll, all that kind of stuff. And so why would you want to stop that? Yeah.
They really don't have a lot going on outside of tourism. They also have a hospital there that is a bit of an economic engine as well. But, an extra $1 billion for 50,000 people, you can do the math, is really nice.
But there are other people in the city who see things differently, like the city's former mayor, Jim Yarbrough.
I don't want to have 5 or 6, 7 terminals down here. I don't want to be overloaded. We can only handle so many people.
I don't want to be overloaded, Yarbrough says. We can only handle so many people.
He is also a member of the board that governs the port. So earlier this year, him and another council member actually proposed pausing the cruise development after the 4th cruise terminal, which is supposed to open in November, does so, and reevaluating is kind of the stance that they took. Like, why don't we pause after that in November opening? Let's reassess and see whether or not we want to continue to go down more and more cruises, right?
When that 4th cruise terminal opens in November, it's set to host a ship called the MSC Seascape 4 times that month, bringing nearly 10,000 people through Galveston each time it docks and departs. But Yarbrough thinks it would be smart to invest more in cargo shipping and less in cruises. While the cargo business doesn't bring in as much revenue for the port, it does employ more local workers and helps diversify the city's economy.
You start looking at the jobs it creates and the economic ripple it creates, the cargo glass past the cruise all the time.
This is the thing that really kind of got me interested in this story, was when we found out, everything you're hearing out from the cruise companies is more cruising, Galveston's great, we love Galveston, but there are some local politicians that are beginning to raise the issue of whether or not Galveston wants to continue to tie its future to cruising.
When Yarbrough and the other board member proposed that pause, it ruffled some feathers.
It made people, especially at the port, quite worried that that was going to send a bad signal to the rest of the industry, that Galveston's kind of closing up its doors. It doesn't want any more cruising.
Red says there are 2 main factions in the city, and it's not as simple as pro-cruise and anti-cruise.
There's these 2 different terms that people use in Galveston. They call them BOIs, it stands for Born on Island, and IBCs, Island by Choice. So Jim Yarbrough and the people kind of in his corner are BOIs. They're all born on the island. They love Galveston. They have this sense of kind of like, we want Galveston to be great, but we kind of still want it for ourselves, right? Like, they don't want to just sacrifice everything and just let it be for the tourists.
Tourists who bring traffic and noise. Plus, they say it's not clear that travelers passing through the city to get on their ships are spending all that much money locally. About 1/3 of tourists spend a night or 2 in Galveston before or after their cruises, but most don't stay long. Then you have the island by choice people, like Roger Reese, the port's CEO. He and others who share his view think that cruising is key to economic development in the area because the cruise industry brings jobs and money to the city. They're trying to get tourists to stay a little longer, spend more while they're in town. But Reese also stresses that courting tourists isn't the only thing the port is doing. It's invested heavily in revamping the cargo industry, too.
They all kind of want the same things, but there's a rift in how they get there.
Yeah, they want their city to succeed, and they have different visions of what success looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And it's become very, very hotly debated.
That proposal, to pause cruise development in the fall for a period of assessment, it failed in a council vote. But people like Yarbrough aren't backing down without a fight. What it comes down to is this. Not everyone in Galveston wants their city to become the next Barcelona.
People might not necessarily associate Barcelona and Galveston, right? But people in Galveston do. They look at Barcelona and they look at what's happening there and they say, maybe that's not the future that we want. And not to be melodramatic, but like the deal with the devil you make when you do say, like, we want more tourists, right? Like, it's this immediate injection of cash that becomes very difficult to distance yourself from. So I think people like Jim Yarbrough and some of the other council members in the city are saying this could be our only opportunity to use the money that we're getting from the cruise industry and then diversify, right? And set Galveston up for a future that isn't just tourism. It isn't just cruise ships. We could potentially bring industry back to Galveston and set it off on a new future.
Is that a tension that the broader global cruise industry is worried about right now as it continues to expand?
Yeah, I mean, the world's a big place, but there's only so many places people really want to cruise and visit. So it will continue to be a conversation, right? But the cruise industry, the cruise companies are extremely ambitious. I'm thinking of like Royal Caribbean CEO, Jason Liberty, who has this kind of like us against the world mentality almost of saying like cruise industry is 2% of the travel industry right now. They want a bigger chunk of that, right? So they're not stopping their expansion anytime soon.
What could be the next Galveston in the U.S.?
I think Galveston is the next Galveston, to be honest with you, just because the momentum is just so intense, and you can tell when you're there just how important cruising is to the city and how important it is to the industry. Galveston for them is kind of the key that unlocks the Western Caribbean. So for the time being, I think it's kind of like, foot on the gas in Galveston for the industry.
This is The Big Take from Bloomberg News. I'm Sarah Holder. To get more from The Big Take and unlimited access to all of Bloomberg.com, subscribe today at Bloomberg.com/podcast offer. If you like this episode, make sure to follow and review The Big Take wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps people find the show. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.